drift of the 28-point thing is that um, Ukraine is punished and Russia is rewarded. That's the overall drift. Um, and the another overall tendency in the document is that Ukraine is not treated as a sovereign state. So Ukraine is described as an object. Things happen to Ukraine. Ukraine loses things. Ukraine must do things. It must change its constitution. It must have elections. It must alter its alliances. It must alter its armed forces. These are all. It's not just that Ukraine is the object and Russia is the subject. It's that Ukraine is not really treated as an actor, right? That's all just kind of gone. And then there are other features that are really striking. Like, I'm not sure if Michael mentioned the amnesty, which essentially says that anybody who did anything in Russia or Ukraine from 2014 to the present is fine. You're fine, because which is extraordinary in of itself. But of course, also that amnesty would seem to implicate international institutions, legal institutions of justice, which are of course not party to any of this. But then there's also something, and I'm not the first to point this out, that's funny about this document, which is that it's plagued by like Russicisms. It's plagued by phrases in English which are clearly just translations from the Russian, where you can't tell what they actually mean. And the reason is that the translation is just not that good, that they're using a Russian phrase that doesn't work so well when you put it through Google Translate, basically.
Right.
So I just wanted to get all of that squared up before we move on, not just as evidence of the Russian authorship of this, which I think Michael has dead to rights in his repertorial work, but also where that leads you at one level. I mean, that leads you to something which is not just procedurally absurd, and not just impossible to implement, as Michael says, but also something which, as a document, reflects certain deep Russian assumptions that Russia